So also around the end of 2015 was when I got into a very intense relationship where I'm a Scorpio descendant and I have my Pluto in Scorpio, and he had an entire stellium in Scorpio. So as far as our descendant being our shadow and our blind spot, and that's why we manifest people who are heavy in that energy so that they can help us wake up to our blind spots. It was again, you can't make this shit up. So I began dating him and having that relationship, and it brought, oh my God, it was shadow work palooza to be with him. And because of that, we broke up a lot. It was just so emotionally intense. It was hard to take. And by the time we got to March of 2016, I was in a pretty deep depression because so much of my shadow had been brought to the surface. Being with him had triggered every ounce of my jealousy issues, which if you're familiar with jealousy issues, they really boil down to a lack of self-worth. It's I thought this much of myself and basically thought why wouldn't he fall in love with someone else and leave me behind? How is that not what's gonna happen? And yeah, it was exactly what I needed. Again, it's how you look at these consequences. There are so many different ways to see it, because manifesting that relationship, while it did bring me a lot of pain, it also woke me up. I don't know how your spiritual process has been. Chances are, if you're studying astrology, you're at least somewhat into your spiritual process, but my awakening, if you want to call it that, came through suffering. And so many people that I've heard talk, Eckhart Tolle has basically the exact same story as what I'm talking about, where the suffering got so bad where I found myself at this fork in the road of either I'm going to figure out how to be happy or I'm going to off myself. I'm just so freaking done living like this. And it was because of the suffering that relationship brought to me. And in the symbolism of it, it was very much about taking him off, that relationship and the ways that it had ensnared my soul. It was so a process of detangling myself and finding my own power inside of myself and finding my own resiliency inside of myself instead of being dependent on this relationship. And so that, again, it's how do you want to look at it? Severe depression, that sounds really awful, but it led to some awesome consequences of spiritual awakening. Saturn went retrograde March 25th of 2016, all the way through August. And while Saturn was retrograded, that was when my spiritual awakening happened. And again, it basically went I was so depressed, I was leaning back into deciding if I wanted to be alive or not. And I recognized that place of there's really nothing good that comes after this. So I'm gonna find a therapist. I'm just gonna go get myself some help. And I get online and I'm bada bing, bada boom. And I find myself a new therapist and I go see her 2 days later. Less than 5 minutes into the session, if you've heard me talk on my channel before about the Deservability Treatment, you've probably heard this story, but less than 5 minutes into the session, she goes and gets a piece of paper. She has me read it. It's the Deservability Treatment by Louise Hay. And it's basically a whole page of I am affirmations. And it is affirming your own sense of worthiness and the fact that you even deserve love in the first place. And as I read through it, and I bawled my eyes out and wanted to stop because this hurts so bad. And she's yeah, I think we found the root of the issue. I think some self-esteem, some self-worth, some self-valuation is what needs to be cultivated here. And the next day I found Abraham Hicks. I went looking for guided meditations and stumbled onto Good Morning Rampage by Abraham Hicks. And I then began down this rabbit hole of my spiritual awakening and studying law of attraction and our emotional guidance system, and basically figuring out that here's this entire language and philosophy, law of attraction, that says that life is just a reflection of what you're putting out there. So if I'm so miserable, if I'm so unhappy with my job is unfulfilling, my relationship, I'm scared he's gonna find blah, blah, there's just all these things that are just tormenting me. And learning law of attraction, I'm you're telling me that's just a reflection of what's going on inside of me. And if something inside of me was different, that my life would be different. Really? I really hope that's not right, because I really want it to be somebody else's fault. Almost 6 years later, nope, that's exactly how it works. At least that's my opinion, because I spent the first 5 months or so of like learning Abraham of like, okay, so let's just say, like, basically I was at a point where there was nowhere to go but up. So, I mean, I might as well try on this belief set and see if it works, and keep what works and disregard the rest. And so I started playing with it. And one of the things that she encourages is spending as much time as possible in appreciation. And so gratitude lists. There's also a TED Talk that I really loved that I was already familiar with, where it's called the Happy Secret to Better Work, I think is what it's called, by Shawn Achor. One of my favorites. And he's a positive psychologist or something like that. And he talks about how to train your brain for positivity, and how it is like measurable that when you feel better, you have better outcomes. Like, they were studying doctors, and like if the doctor felt comfortable and calm and secure and like they had everything under control, they had a better outcome in treating patients. And when the doctor felt negative or stressed or like overwhelmed or any of that, their outcomes with patients went down. Not as good doctors when they're unhappy. So it's like provable that when we train what's inside of us to feel good and to, be what we want it to be, focusing ourselves towards appreciation, counting our blessings, like looking at where do I already have what I've wanted in the past, because it's so easy. He says, like, we put happiness on the cognitive horizon, where like it's so easy to get what you want and then immediately you move on to like, he's like, you met your sales target, we're going to change your sales target. You got a job, now you need to get a better job. Like, you got good grades, now you can get better grades. Like, he just like gives you all these examples and you're like, yes, that's exactly what it is. That's been my life. But it's like, we don't have to do that. We can allow ourselves to feel good in the now. We can put, the cart before the horse, as far as like, our society is very trained of like, show me the proof and then I'll believe it. And in that same way, like, give me the good thing and then I'll feel happy. And it's like, what if you felt happy anyway? What if you felt happy proactively and let the world reflect that to you? What if that was a thing? So that first 5 months of finding Abraham was wild in terms of, basically, my life proved to me that it was true. Like, I started that day that I found Abraham, I started making gratitude lists. And just like Shawn says, like, all you need to do is like write down 3 things. Like, we're not trying to spend 3 hours like drawing gratitude lists. Like, if you can spend 5 minutes writing 3 things, you've done good work. So that was where I started, was every day I was going to write down 3 things I was grateful for. And this overall shift, like, this is definitely where it kind of takes off, as far as like, I was building a life according to somebody else's recipe, and shifting gears into building your own life according to your own recipe. That doesn't just happen overnight. And so I feel like that first 5 months of finding Abraham was such that shift of like, okay, so if I'm not going to do it according to how everybody else does it, how do I know what to do? And then here I manifest Abraham Hicks to teach me about my emotional guidance system and how my literal emotions will point me in the right direction in real time. So yeah, that's like super valuable. And it took me a little bit of time to kind of get the hang of, oh my gosh, yes, when I feel better, my life is better and easier and happier. And when I get all tangled up inside of my own stress, life is harder. And so it's like, it becomes imperative to manage your own emotions. And so that's what I was recognizing. And it's kind of funny that like, I had to go through that part all by myself. And then almost immediately, so like a month later, I adopted my first dog, Stella. When I was with Jason, he had gotten a dog, Thor, and he he only had him for a few months before we started seeing each other. So Thor grew up with me just as much with Jason, and he had kind of chosen me as his master. And so he followed me around everywhere. I'd never had that before. And so when Jason and I broke up, I gotta say, like, mostly I missed the dog. And after a year of not having a dog, and I went through all of this process with my spiritual awakening, that was like one of the first things that changed was I got a dog. I got my own dog, and like me and Stella went running, and it was just a totally different lifestyle to have her with me all the time, because obviously now I'm going outside multiple times a day. I'm getting way more exercise because I'm having to walk her because we live in the city. So there was just a huge shift at that point that like, it was only like a month of studying Abraham, and I felt like my life just kind of blossomed at that point, and then it didn't really stop until I'll let you know when it stops. Okay, so I adopted Stella. That means that now I have Lola and Stella. I got Lola back when I was in college. So I've had her a long time. And then, so this other milestone was extremely significant, and I'm not gonna go into it in super great detail just because I don't want to promote doing this if this isn't something that you're already being called towards. Like, I was being called to try mushrooms. It was a soul level calling that it's like, please do this. And I would say I had that like from the time I was in college. I never had the opportunity, like I never crossed paths with it in college, but I definitely started thinking about it just because there were definitely people who told me stories, and I was like, I want that. I think I want that. And then it took me like 8 years to actually do it. And even beyond those 8 years, probably about the time I got Stella, it was like at least 3 or 4 months of very seriously considering doing it. And I found a source, and I did research, and I talked to different people who had done it several times. I got their advice. I prepared myself. I feel like I had a really healthy fear of what was possible with a bad mushroom trip. I had heard enough of those stories that like, it's not something to fool around with. It's not recreational. It's like, I felt like it was a spiritual initiation that my soul was asking for. And before I did it, I couldn't understand why. And that's why I put it off for so long. But after finding Abraham and like what she was talking about, like, you know, the things that feel good, like walk towards them. And if a good feeling thought is occurring to you over and over and over again, like you're meant to go towards that thing. And like, it felt so good, and it felt so right. And like, I just couldn't not do it. So on November 23rd, the day before Thanksgiving of 2016, it's also interesting because I didn't go home for Thanksgiving that year, which is that was significant. That was the first time that I had ever like skipped being with my family on a major holiday. And that was also like kind of part of that growing up initiation, as far as like, I didn't want to. Like, that's not my idea of a good time. So I'm going to do what I think is fun, and I'm going to do what is satisfying to me. It's my holiday from work, and I'm not going to do something just because I feel obligated. I'm going to do something that feels like it's satisfying to my soul. And so I skipped going home, and I stayed, and I had a Friendsgiving, and the day before I did mushrooms. And oh my gosh, I needed it. I needed that. It was absolutely a spiritual initiation, and I had a spontaneous past life regression in the middle of it, and all sorts of different things. And I'm gonna flash my notes here on the screen. If you want to pause and read it, you're more than welcome. But I am a scientist at heart. I perform experiments, and I observe, and I learn, and then I change my variables in my next experiment, and I do the experiment, and I observe, and I learn, and then I change my variables. And like, that's mutable energy. That's basically what we're doing. And so, yeah, that was a good time doing the mushrooms. And literally 2 weeks later, I quit my software company job. I decided to take a leap of faith and step away from a 6-figure salary to, I wasn't really sure.